Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining our Be Women Solutions webinar, weekly webinars, where we connect, we share, we learn, and to seek further to inspire actions that matter. In these webinars, these are unique opportunities to reflect, to actually reimagine how we're gonna reimagine our future and discover our real purpose, especially in these moments where we need to transform and create authentic change. So I'm Laura Jadoru Koch, founder of Be Women Solution, and passionate about using the business and the markets as a force for good to address issues on inequality and gender. This webinar will last 50 minutes, and it will be amazing, inspiring, because the title is Using Your Vote to Take Back the World. And our very special speakers are John Bunzl, International Simulation Policy Organization. He is a force of nature to create real change that is so necessary today. A real inspiration on what needs to be done and where we need to go. And our moderator is Paul Jarvis, National Coordinator for Simpol in Spain. Just a few more seconds about Be Women Solutions. Who we are a global network of women entrepreneur and intrapreneur that seeks to balance purpose and profits towards a more caring economy, an economic system in which we genuinely care for the wellness and fulfillment of people and respect and responsibility for our environment. We collaborate with thousands of women and men to co-create awareness and inspire specific actions regarding our two burning issues, as I mentioned, the gender and inequality and climate change. A few more seconds more, about Be Women and our empowering move that gives us energy to continue. And we need to please put your shoulders back so that when you're energized hearing this conversation, put your chin up, your eyes that twinkle with joy and determination, and with a super wide smile, please, Paul, the line is all yours.
Okay, thank you, Laura. That's fantastic. And I loved your phrase of balancing purpose with profit, because I think that aligns very much with what John is going to be talking about. So hello, everybody. As Laura has said, I am working with John in terms of Simpol, which we're going to be hearing about from John today. And I'm going to moderate in any form that you need me to do so. So I will keep a check on the chat box. If you've got particular questions you'd like John to address when he's finished his presentation, then please put them into the chat box. If for any reason you can't get into the chat box, maybe you can communicate via Laura. But John is, and I have here a copy of his book. John is the author of this book, the Simple Policy and Simple Solution. And it is a fascinating book. And in the next 20 minutes or so, he's going to be running through the principles that are expanded on in the book. The principles are the ones that touch all of us and are currently more important and more urgent than ever. So I would already promote the idea that at some point it would be worth getting into Amazon and buying a copy of the book, because I'm sure you'll find what John's going to cover is extremely stimulating. I'm based in Madrid. I've been living here in Madrid for the last 28 years. And John is based in the south of London, or south of England rather. So let me hand you over to John and he can start his presentation, and I will track as best I can the questions and make sure that we get everything answered for you by the time we come to the close. Over to you, John.
Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you, Laura, and Be Women Solutions and all your team for your very kind invitation to us to sort of present the Simultaneous policy, or Simpol for short, to you. I've got a PowerPoint presentation which I'd like to show you, so I'm going to screen share now, and hopefully it'll work. Laura, you can tell me if it doesn't. Where are we?
Perfect. We're now, you put it on the screen.
Okay, can everybody see that?
Perfect. Excellent.
There are lots of global problems. We all know that, right? As we know, there are, like we say, climate change, wealth inequality, nuclear proliferation, corporate tax avoidance, you name it. There are more and more problems that we could describe as global. In other words, that no individual nation can solve alone. And this is something quite new and is sort of part of globalization. You know, maybe 100 years or so, or 50 to 100 years ago, when national economies were much more independent, problems were fairly national. And we had national governments in place and capable of dealing with them. But now we have global problems. They've gone beyond the national level. And so, but we don't have any governance at the global level. And so we have a bit of a problem because we have these problems, but we don't have any means to deal with them. So there are a lot of these global problems. But I'd like to suggest, and what underpins Simpol is that there's really just one barrier to solving them. And I think it's actually quite well expressed in this little cartoon image that you can see, where whoever wins the race, whichever country acts first or most decisively to cut its carbon emissions or to do the right thing, will actually cut its own throat. So, for example, to really drastically cut carbon emissions, a national government would have to dramatically increase taxes on business. It would have to tighten regulations. But in a global economy, of course, any country that did that would only see its businesses and thousands of jobs move elsewhere to avoid those higher taxes and regulations. So whoever does the right thing ends up harming their economy. And of course, every other country, if you look at the runner behind, number 2 here, is sort of got his finger up to his mouth and saying, well, I don't want to go there either, right? So we have this kind of vicious circle going on where no nation wants to move first, or you could envisage it like a bunch of aged gentlemen in front of one of these revolving doors at a fancy hotel, where each one is saying, oh, well, after you. Oh, no, please, after you. You know, no nation wants to move first because it will harm its economy. And that's why nothing dramatic is really happening. That's why climate change isn't really being addressed. That's why tax avoidance isn't really being addressed. You see, all of these, well, there's a stalemate situation. There's a vicious circle going on at the global level, and I call it destructive global competition. Let me give you one example relating to climate change. You can see these examples if you look carefully in the newspapers. In almost any serious newspaper, you can see this one's from the Financial Times. Governments remain reluctant to address this threat because any country acting alone to curb its greenhouse gas emissions without similar commitments by other governments risks damaging the competitiveness of its industries. Yeah. So this is the vicious circle. Nobody wants to move first. But it's not just governments that are stuck in this vicious circle of destructive global competition. Corporations are too. So let me give you an example from The Economist here. There was an article some time ago where they concluded that any firm choosing to go green will merely burden itself with higher costs than its less virtuous competitors. Okay, now, if you're a business person, and in fact my background is business, your competitors could be anywhere on the planet. And if you try to do the honorable thing by perhaps respecting the environment more, or by treating your staff better, and therefore that costs you more money, you risk losing out to your competitors elsewhere who may not be following the same ethical norms. Now, that's not to say that corporations can't do the right thing at all. There are some exceptions to this. But what you tend to find is that in any particular market sector, there's usually just one company that is setting an example. So for example, in the ice cream sector in the States, there's just Ben & Jerry's that has this more ethical approach. But why aren't all the ice cream companies in America doing it? The reason is because although it may be possible for one company to make social and environmental responsibility into a kind of ethical market niche and to gain from that, that doesn't mean that other companies will be able to follow because of the fear of losing out. And so, corporations to a great extent are stuck in this vicious circle as well. So really, what we're faced with in the world is a fundamental dilemma between, on the one side, economic growth and competitiveness, and yet on the other, society and the environment. And as I say, prior to globalization, there wasn't such a marked dilemma. Why? Because economies were more independent and they were governed by their national government, and that government could reconcile that dilemma. The fork was much less pronounced, if you like, than it is now. But with globalization and multinational companies able to move all over the place, that no national government can act alone, and that then makes this dilemma, this fundamental dilemma between growth and competitiveness on the one side and society and environment on the other, much more pronounced. And that is the underlying source of the inaction on these issues that we see in the world. So the key takeaway from this is that it's not that governments don't want to solve global problems, it's that destructive global competition means that they can't solve them. They can't. It's not a question of will, it's a question of systemic, the systemic vicious circle that I've been talking about. And for us as citizens, this leaves us with a choice here. Either we can try and ignore this dilemma, or we can try and take it seriously. Now, if we want to ignore it, we can carry on blaming politicians, we can carry on blaming corporations, we can carry on blaming almost anyone other than ourselves. We can engage in protest and civil disobedience and all of these things. And if you're as old as I am, you'll have seen I'm 62, by the way. You'll have seen the protests against the World Trade Organization. You'll have seen, Occupy. You'll have seen Reclaim the Streets. Now we've got Extinction Rebellion. We've had all of these protests and blame games going on, but they are getting us nowhere. They're getting us nowhere. Why? Because they don't deal with the fundamental dilemma. So I put here, this is I think what Dr. Phil, I think Laura says to people who are complaining about their life and complaining about what they're doing on his TV program, and he says, well, how's it working for you? And this is my question to the global justice movement. We've been at this for 40 years. How is it working for us? It isn't working. Why? Because we're not dealing with destructive global competition. So what would taking it seriously look like? First of all, it would mean recognizing that no one is really to blame for this. Yes, there are some evil people out there. There is, corporate manipulation. There are corporate lobbyists. There are people trying to game the system. But generally speaking, it's not that business leaders or politicians don't understand that there are problems to be solved, it's that destructive global competition means that they actually can't act. So there is no point in blaming these people. We have to take responsibility. And what it means, this global vicious circle, means that we need a new kind of global politics capable of reining that vicious circle in, capable of resolving it. And at the bottom here, I put it's not an either or. So what I mean by that is I'm not suggesting that the global justice movement or NGOs like Greenpeace, Friends of the Earth, I'm not suggesting that these people stop the important work that they're doing. What I'm suggesting is that they carry on with that, but that they add this new level of global political action to what they are already doing. Okay, so it's not an either or, it's a both and. And so that brings me on to the simultaneous policy, which I'm proposing is what this global level of politics could look like. So Simpol actually consists, there's kind of three parts to it. There's the policy, the pledge, and the process. So let me talk first about the policy itself. So what is the simultaneous policy? Well, it's a range of policies that are to be implemented by all or sufficient nations simultaneously. So policies to solve climate change, all of these global problems that we've been talking about, and those policies are to be implemented by all the sufficient nations on the same date at the same time. Why? Because that is the only way that we will break the vicious circle of destructive global competition. If everybody moves together, everyone wins, nobody loses out. Corporations and the rich have nowhere to run because everyone is acting together. Simpol will contain only policies that nations can't implement alone. Okay, so Simpol doesn't deal with all problems, it just deals with global problems. That's important because it means that at lower levels down the system, at the national level or at the local level, nations are still left to deal with all other issues that can be dealt with at national or lower levels. So Simpol is only dealing with the problems that are above the nation state, problems that are transnational or global. Also, Simpol, I mean, a lot of people misunderstand Simpol as meaning that all nations would do exactly the same thing on the same date. No, what we're talking about is not a one-size-fits-all. What we would be talking about is that, for example, if there were to be a simultaneous policy on corporation tax, it might mean not that all corporations in every country would pay the same level. It would mean maybe that existing levels would be increased by a certain agreed percentage in proportion. So we're not talking about a one-size-fits-all. We are talking about a graduated policy that is graduated to suit the circumstances of each nation. Also, we're not talking about all of these policies being implemented all on one day to solve all of these global problems. That would be crazy. What we're talking about is really a series of multi-issue policy packages. So for example, on, sorry, I've just gone a little bit ahead of myself. Each policy package would contain two or more complementary issues. Why? Because if you look at what the United Nations is trying to do, the United Nations is trying to solve climate change on its own. The only issue on the table is carbon emissions. But if you take any global issue, like carbon emissions, there will always be some nations that win and others that lose. And because there is only one issue on the table, the losers have got no incentive to cooperate. So if you take the United States, for example, you know, it has no incentive to cooperate in the Paris Climate Agreement, which is why it's pulled out, because it's going to have the highest costs to bear because it has the highest emissions. But with a multi-issue framework, you could combine a climate agreement with, for example, a global tax on wealth, or some other global tax which would raise massive funds, which could then be redistributed to those loser nations to keep them on board with the climate part of the agreement. Okay, so what a nation sort of loses on the swings, it can gain on the roundabouts. So by having two or more issues joined together in a policy package, you have the opportunity to make action in every nation's immediate interest. Okay, so that overcomes one of the key problems with the United Nations process. And as I said, it would be a series of multi-issue policy packages. So we would perhaps have a climate and wealth tax would be one package, which would be implemented simultaneously in year 1. Then there would be another package in year 3, another package in year 5, and so on. And each package would, of course, give an opportunity for previous packages to be revised or added to. Also, the policy is not going to be designed by politicians, but it would be designed or strongly influenced bottom up by citizens. Because if you think about it, politicians at the moment, because of destructive global competition, global policy is kind of out of their domain. It is not something they can even contemplate, because destructive global competition hems them into a much more restricted policy agenda, which in effect is just a business-friendly, fairly neoliberal, competitiveness-oriented agenda. So what we need is citizens to develop that more global, that more open range of policies that we really need to solve these global issues. And the final negotiations to determine what the precise policy content of Simpol would be would only happen once sufficient governments have signed the Simpol pledge, which I'm going to go on to in a moment. Because there is no point in developing the policies for Simpol now until we've got the political support available to actually implement them. So for the moment, the idea is that Simpol is designed to make cooperation in every nation's self-interest. Okay. So let's move on to the pledge. The pledge is what we are asking members of parliament, members of Congress, political parties and governments to sign. So what is that pledge? Well, it's a one-page document which you can see on our website. But in essence, it says, I pledge to implement the simultaneous policy only if all the sufficient nations have also signed the pledge and if the policy content of Simpol has been agreed. Okay, so you can see from that that it's purely a pledge in principle. It's effectively saying, I will if you will. It's getting politicians, governments, political parties into the room in principle so that we can then deal with the actual policies. So it's a means of building international trust and confidence. And for each person or each politician that signs on to Simpol, that signs the pledge, they're basically standing up and saying, I'm ready to implement these solutions to global problems if and when you are. I will if you will. So there's a kind of challenge in it as well. And of course, there's nothing to lose because it all gets done if all the sufficient nations are on board. So let's move on to the process. How are we actually going to get this done? You're probably thinking that I should perhaps belong in a mental asylum by now, talking about all or sufficient nations implementing these policies simultaneously. So I can certainly forgive you for that. But have a look at the process, because this is the interesting part. So, and this is where you as citizens come in, because when you sign on to the Simpol campaign, you're basically turning around to your politicians and you're saying to them, I'm going to be giving strong preference at all future national elections to politicians who've signed the pledge. Okay, now, that sounds terribly simple, but it's in fact a highly disruptive political act, because current politics depends at the moment on citizens choosing one party or another. Okay, what Simpol does is it says to politicians, not so fast. We are going to turn the tables on you politicians and governments. We are actually going to reserve our vote for whichever party, or we're going to give preference to whichever politician or party signs the pledge, right? And so this actually turbocharges the competition between politicians and parties. And it also has a powerful domino effect. And we've demonstrated this in elections in the United Kingdom, for example, where in some parliamentary seats, the margin between the winning member of parliament and the second candidate is very, very small, right? It's what we call it a marginal seat. And often what we've found in those cases is that in the run up to an election, we've perhaps managed to get the Green Party candidate signed up. And then when the others see that the Green Party signed up, the Liberal Democrat signs up. And then the Labour Party candidate signs up. And then, oh gosh, the Tory candidate thinks, oh my God, I better sign up too, because if I don't, and there are enough Simpol supporters in my area who might vote for my competitor, I could lose the election. Okay, so in the end, we've actually had all the candidates signing up. So whoever wins, Simpol wins. It doesn't matter which party gets it, which politician or party gets in. So this is a way of driving existing politicians and parties to pledge, to sign the Simpol pledge, and ultimately we will then get whole parties signing up, and then eventually governments. And so this is one way we can use our votes to take back the world, to drive our politicians to where we need them to go. And as I explained, Simpol doesn't actually need a majority. It only needs the critical number. Okay, it only needs that balance of power between, the main candidate and the next candidate. The smaller that difference is, the more power Simpol has, or the fewer people, fewer citizens it takes. And you have to remember that signing the Simpol pledge for a politician is a win-win-lose. It's a win, firstly, because he has the chance, he or she makes him or herself eligible to receive our votes. So that's a win. The second win is that they don't have to actually implement the simultaneous policy until, of course, all the sufficient nations are on board. But it could be a lose for them if they don't sign up, but their competitor does. They could lose their seats. If there's enough Simpol supporters, they could lose their seats. Right. Now you might say, yeah, but politicians will sign anything to get your vote, and then they'll just go back on it after the election. But think about it. Simpol only gets implemented if and when all the sufficient nations are on board. So there is really nothing for a politician to renege on, there's nothing for them to go back on until the date for implementation arrives. And in fact, any politician who just cynically signed the pledge and then cancelled it after the election, what would he or she be doing? They'd just be simply saying to all our growing number of supporters, please don't ever vote for me again. Okay, so there is that, once a politician has signed the pledge, there is absolutely no point in them going back on it. So the idea of what we're trying to do here is to get consensus, political consensus among politicians, parties and governments kicked off in democratic countries, first of all. And then if we get to a certain level of profile in the world, then of course, non-democratic countries will be invited to join the process. And of course, it'll be in their interest to join the process. Why? Because, as I said, it's based on win-win solutions on a multi-issue, swings and roundabouts. You know, every nation has something to gain here and nothing to lose. And as global problems steadily worsen, it's going to be in non-democratic nations' interests to join this process too. So let me just also say, however, that this Simpol is not an alternative to the United Nations. It's a complementary process. You know, we can do, I'm not saying you should stop supporting the United Nations. We should continue, but this is something else we can do as an additional action. So, as I said, it's about using our votes in a new way to take back the world, to drive politicians to pledge to implement the simultaneous policy so that we can solve not just climate change, but all of the other global problems that suffer from this destructive global competition problem. So what have our results been so far? Well, in the UK, in the general election at the end of last year, we got over 700 candidates from across all the main parties to sign the pledge. And of those, 95 became members of parliament. And since then, we've actually increased that to 100. So that's about 15% of the entire UK parliament have signed the Simpol pledge. Okay, and that includes Green Party, you know, it goes all the way across, mostly on the left, but also some politicians on the right as well. Because if you think about it, politicians on the right, what's the one thing they care most about? They care about their national economic competitiveness. And Simpol is the only global justice campaign that fully respects that need. That's why it's about simultaneous implementation. Nobody loses out on their national competitiveness. In Ireland, we got 50, at the last election 3 years ago, we got 53 candidates signed, and 11 of those are now TDs, well, that's the equivalent of their members of parliament. In Germany, similar figures, we got about 50 candidates to sign, and we now have 11 members of the German Bundestag. And we also have some politicians in the EU Parliament who are pledged in Australia, Luxembourg, Argentina, and in 1 or 2 other countries too. So it's early days, but here's a way that citizens can actually use their vote in a very imaginative way to drive politicians to solve global problems. So I would ask you, I would encourage you to take a look at our website and to sign on. It's completely free. And it doesn't mean, you know, it's important to understand that, I mean, when you sign on to Simpol, it's a little bit like having 2 votes. So when you sign on to Simpol, you are informing your parliamentary or congressional representatives that you're going to be much, much more likely to vote for them next time if they've signed the Simpol pledge, right? So your signing on for Simpol works in advance of the election, right? But then when election day comes round, you're free to use your vote just like you always do, okay? Obviously, we would want you to give preference to a candidate that has signed the pledge if there is one, but it doesn't compel you to vote for that candidate. So Simpol is a bit like having 2 votes rolled into one that is global and the other that's national. So as Paul mentioned, there's my book, which I actually was co-written with Nick Duffel, who is a psychotherapist, because in the book, we go into the psychology of what we call nation centrism. So part of understanding the way the world works and part of understanding destructive global competition is to take off our nation-centric national glasses and put on our world-centric global glasses. When we do that, you start to see that things like Simpol are just ABC. They are just common sense. And so that's really what the book helps readers to do. And it's been endorsed by Noam Chomsky, by many other people, by Ken Wilber, by Ervin Laszlo, by many evolutionary biologists, by economists, by quite a wide range of people. So, but as I say, you can find more information on our website. So, my friends, that is really it. Thank you very much for listening and for putting up with me droning on. Thank you. So I'm wondering if there are any questions.
Yeah, Paul, you're muted. You're trying to make the question. There we go.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm not on mute anymore. Thank you for pointing that out. Very embarrassing. It is an amazing book, this, and it is amazing because the combination of John and Nick has taken an approach which, for me, at a personal level, demonstrates how important it is that we all do something. And when we look at the psychology of how we work as human beings, it's so easy to be interested in something, to get involved in academically understanding it, but not actually taking an action that could make a difference for the better. And so I would just reinforce, I think it's a great book, and there's a lot of great lessons at both a political level, an economic level, and at a personal level that comes out from it. Great. So we've got a few questions that came in, John, and we've got a number of people from quite a range of countries as well. And I don't know whether from a country point of view, anybody's got any comments to make about the situation in their countries. But so we've got somebody here from Saudi Arabia, for example, which is a country that's very much involved. Its whole economy is based on the old industry and the use of oil and so on. And it would be wonderful to feel that a country like Saudi Arabia would be able to be influenced in some way as we move forward with this. What's your opinion, John, of a company like Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, one of the policy packages that I was referring to could be a climate agreement plus a global wealth tax or a global currency transactions tax. Now, why would a country like Saudi Arabia how could such a policy be in their interests? You would immediately think, no, that's, a policy on carbon emissions, that's got to be completely against their interests. However, if from the proceeds of the global tax, a portion is reserved for oil producing countries to compensate them for the lower level of production that they're going to have to put up with, and to help them transition towards diversifying their economy, there is then something in it for them.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
So this is my point about a multi-issue policy packages. So what Saudi Arabia would lose on the climate part of the agreement, it would gain on the global tax part of the agreement. So,
and historically, that is the sorts of things that have happened. When slave trading was banned, however many hundreds of years ago it was, the UK government's biggest payout ever was made to compensate the loss of the use of slaves by those that had been building the Industrial Revolution. So
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
It's a very interesting story, but it is a huge payout that they made as the economy was moved into a different time and a different profile. Okay, so let me just have a look at the other questions that we've got coming in. How will engagement happen is a question that we've got. in other words, what is the action that an individual can take in order to help the whole process of Simpol move forward? What would you like to see individuals do, regardless of the country that they're in?
Okay, well, I mean, the first thing I would invite them to do is to sign on to the campaign at simpol.org, which is completely free, and to find out more about Simpol. And then if you would like, if you, in many countries, we don't yet have representation. So if whether we have or not, if we already have representation, you know, there are plenty of roles where we need voluntary help to get the campaign going in each country. And if we don't have any representation in your country, you may wish to talk to me about becoming Simpol's national coordinator for that country. And that's something that we could discuss separately, of course, together.
Yeah. Fantastic. And we could do with another few in Spanish-speaking countries, couldn't we?
We need, yes, South America is pretty much open. Central America, we have nobody at all. So we would love to have your help.
There's another great question here. And the question is, I'll just read it. Not everyone researches their candidates beforehand. How do you know on a ballot paper if the candidate has signed the pledge or not?
Okay, well, you won't know that on a ballot paper. You will know that from looking at our website, because because we have our global website, which is simpol.org, but we also have national websites. So if there is an election going on in your country, as each politician or candidate signs up, we post them straight onto our website. Okay. And then you will know. If you just keep a lookout, we will probably also, I mean, at the moment, we're, you know, because we don't have so many people working on this, our opportunities are a little limited, but yeah, we would certainly in important electoral areas, we would flash email our supporters in those areas to say, boy, this particular candidate signed up, please give them your preference.
Yeah, fantastic.
And so often also what you find is that the politicians are looking, you see, because if one of them signs up, the others are kind of start getting worried, you know, and we've seen this, I mean, it's a little bit like I mentioned earlier. I mean, in one particular constituency in North Wales, Laura, I can see, I love it when people smile and laugh, because it shows that you understand what we're doing here. So I think it was the night before the election, and I'd got, you know, I was running it from my laptop, and I'd got I got the Green Party candidate, the Lib Dem, the Liberal Democrat, the Labour, and it was a Conservative seat, but it was very marginal. I think it had been just won at the previous election by just like 100 votes or something. And then at 1 o'clock in the morning, the sitting Conservative MP signs the pledge because he just finally cracked because he couldn't stand the pressure anymore. And so, you know, what we have here is a tremendously powerful tool. And it's a tool that politicians cannot ignore. So it's like if you want a rabbit to jump, you dangle a carrot. If you want a politician to jump, you dangle a vote. You know, and this is why protest, civil disobedience, all of these things don't really work. We've got to get politicians where it counts, and that is the vote. And that is the power of Simpol.
Okay. We have a very specific question as to whether there's a representative in Mexico or not.
No, there isn't. I would be delighted to talk to you.
Okay, we will follow that one up. That's
please. Yeah, just email me. It's I'll just put my email on the chat actually. Where are we? So it's jbunzl@simpol.org. There we go. So yeah, please do email me and we can have a chat, or we can have a Skype or something just to talk a little bit about it.
There's also a couple of comments around some countries have compulsory voting and others don't.
Australia has compulsory voting, doesn't it?
Indeed. So the countries that don't very often have relatively low levels of attendance and so on. Any comments that you'd make about differences in terms of, for Simpol's future, do you think there could be faster growth within compulsory voting countries as opposed to non-compulsory, or do you see it as no difference?
Well, I can't, yeah, it's a good question. I can't quite remember, but someone in Australia, I mean, I'm a Brit, so I don't fully understand the Australian system, but somebody told me that the compulsory voting that you have in Australia actually would make Simpol more powerful than less, rather than less. I don't quite know why that is, but that's what one person has mentioned. I mean, in Australia, we already have, I think, four Australian Labor Party MPs who've pledged. We also had a couple of Green senators, but I think they, meantime, moved on. But you know, we're looking for someone to help us coordinate in Australia. So, you know, I'd be delighted to talk to anyone interested.
Okay, great. Let me just.
I'm sorry, just adding to that, Paul, and to that question is, I think the interesting thing is that, you know, the way I've been describing Simpol to you has been a bit based on the UK system, which is what we call a first past the post system. So it means that in each parliamentary seat, there is just one seat per area. And even if that person wins by just one vote, they win that seat and all the other candidates lose. Okay, but in Ireland and in Germany, which are proportional representation systems, we've also managed to be quite successful. So I think the point is really that Simpol works on, you know, since elections are basically based on competition between candidates and parties, it doesn't matter. Simpol will work regardless.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, obviously, the only place it won't work would be in a non-democratic country.
Yes.
Where there are no elections, or where the elections are just, you know, a single party state. But for those countries, we are hoping, like I said, that once we get the ball rolling in democratic countries, you know, that the pressure will met with global problems sort of gradually going up and up and up, you know, and those, you know, non-democratic countries suffering as well from climate change and so forth, the incentive for them to join this process will only grow.
Yeah, and there is a mutual need to communicate around all of global issues just for the purpose of trade. So whether you're democratic or whether you're not democratic, you're going to be sitting at the table. Yeah. Okay, we've got another question which is about monitoring of candidates' behaviours, and that's a very interesting question. Do you feel that it's necessary to do that, or do you think the way that the Simpol solution is created means that that's not necessary?
Well, it depends what you mean by their behaviour. The only behaviour that we care about is if they sign the pledge, that they don't cancel it.
Yeah.
Right. You know, their behaviour. And obviously, we are encouraging them to publicise the fact that they've signed the pledge, to inform their voters in their area that they've done so, to put it on their website, and so on. But their behaviour, other than that, in terms of, you know, do they support, I don't know, you know, a fairer, I don't know, some other, you know, other sort of national issues. That's really not something for Simpol. That's really, you know, Simpol is only dealing with global issues. We're trying to get cooperation at the global level. What happens underneath that at the national level is really nothing to do with us. That's what other NGOs are designed to, you know, or political parties or pressure groups. That's what they're designed to deal with. You know, the unique thing about Simpol is that you know, out of all the millions of NGOs out there, there's only one dealing with the global level, and that's us.
Yeah.
Or at least dealing with it in this way, let's say.
Yes, yes, yes. Okay, and another question, it may be the last one, but oh no, two questions. The first one's really simple. Can we distribute a copy of the PowerPoint?
Yes, of course.
Yes. So how would you be able to send that? Do you want everyone to send you an email if they want it, or maybe Laura can coordinate that?
Yes,
I can do that.
Whatever.
I will generally I send the PowerPoint to everybody. Finish the conversation. The recording will be sent to everybody with the PowerPoint, if that's possible.
Terrific, thank you.
Laura, I think I should just clear up. I should just clean up the PowerPoint.
Oh, sure.
I think there are some notes and bits and pieces that are probably a little bit out of sync. So if you allow me to clean it up, I'll then send you a good copy. Yeah.
And you can add all the links to register and also any link you have, so that people, if they want to become a Simpol representative, what is it their responsibilities to do so?
Yes, I mean, we have a whole manual which explains all the responsibilities and everything.
Can you give us just a few responsibilities, just to see if there's more other than that? I know here.
Well, I mean, the main responsibility of a national coordinator really is to engage in national elections when they come round every 3, 4, 5 years or whatever it is. And to actually run a campaign, because elections are the time when politicians are most responsive, of course, to Simpol. However, in between elections, a national coordinator can also email their politicians to encourage them to sign up. So as I said, I think earlier, during the last election, we got 95 UK members of Parliament to sign the pledge. But since then, we managed to get another 5 to sign up after the election. You know, so Simpol sort of runs all the time. You know, national coordinators are campaigning to get politicians to sign up all the time, but obviously much more actively in the run-up to an election.
And I would just say that we've got a lot of materials that can be used. It isn't a case of a national representative having to create materials and design a lot of things. And there is part of the website that's already in Spanish. So the principal description for Spanish-speaking countries is already created.
Yeah, there's lots of resources that we have, and we are also, you know, developing internal training programs to train you in how to articulate these ideas, how to present them, how to answer objections and criticism. And so forth. So I'm still looking forward to some good criticism from you guys now.
Well, your comment there is really good, because the last question I think that's up here is about how to put this over to a younger generation that at the moment is showing itself to be either accepting and taking whatever's given to them, or in Extinction Rebellion terms, getting terribly active and terribly involved. Do you feel the messaging or the way that Simpol is explained is different for, let's say, university type age of people as opposed to, let's say, more mature business people?
That's a really good question. I mean, young people are, it's tough. We find that, I think, older people, or more mature people will tend to resonate with Simpol much more, because they are not quite so impatient, and they're not quite so attached to instant gratification, and are much more able, I think, to understand that this isn't about us and them. It's about a system. It's like a whirlpool in which we're all like fish, we're all caught, and our governments are caught in it, and our corporations are caught in it, and we're all caught in it as well. And when you start to see the world in that way, you become much more compassionate.
Yeah.
You know, you can see that it's not so much that people are bent on evil stuff. They're just trying to do the best they can in a system that is really militating towards the wrong goals, really.
Yeah. Okay.
And you know, I think one of the things, just coming back to what Laura said right at the beginning about Be Women's Solutions, is about cooperation and empathy. And in a sense, the way I see it is that at the moment we have this out of control, competitive global market, which, if you like, is the sort of the masculine gone crazy. What we need to add is that holding feminine governance framework of cooperation. And that's what Simpol would deliver if it were successful, you know. Because in the end of the day, what you need is governance and the market in balance. What we have today is the market running free at the global level, but governance is still stuck at the national level.
Yes.
And that's where the imbalance is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You see, and that's the source of the cancer, if you like.
Yeah.
So what we need to do is to bring the governance back up to the same global level as the global market.
Splendid. Okay. I think we've run out of questions there, unless anybody has got anything else that they would like to ask as well.
If you can mention something about how do you think governments will collaborate? I mean, the last time there was a collaboration initiative was during 2015, where the signing of the SDG, Sustainable Development Goals. Everybody realized that. Yours will be the next one. But since COVID, there's been very little collaboration of the SDGs between governments themselves. There's been a lot of collaboration with large corporations. That's interesting. How do you, what incentives do you put as a Simpol to get more governments to collaborate, at least in between twos or threes, you know, in Europe?
Yeah, I mean, I think Laura, we're entering a period now where, because of this imbalance that I was talking about, there is now actually a regression back towards the national. You're seeing that with Brexit, with Trump, with these, you know, the right-wing parties beginning to be on the ascendancy in Eastern Europe, in fact, even also in Western Europe, in fact, all over the place. And that is because we have a global economy without the cooperative global governance to match it. And so the system is breaking down, you see. And so I think we're entering a period where we're going to, sadly, we're going to see less and less international cooperation that is instituted by governments themselves, because they're all fighting each other, they're all competing with each other. So that's why we've got to step up, we citizens. You know, nobody's going to do this for us. We've got to do it ourselves. Simpol, I like to think, gives us the tool to do that, a very powerful tool that politicians can't ignore. And I mean, the other thing I would say is that this electoral power that Simpol gives us is also what would give us the power to determine the policy content of Simpol. Because if we've got that voting power that politicians can't ignore, we also then have the power collectively among Simpol supporters to determine what the policy content of Simpol should be. So it won't be the politicians dictating it to us, we'll be more dictating it to them, right? So, you know, that's, I mean, there is also a document on our website called the Information Pack. It's not a great, not a terribly inspiring name for the thing, but that gives much more information on how the policy, we envisage the policy content of Simpol being developed and by whom, and how non-democratic nations would be drawn into the process, and so forth. So all of the information is there on our website. But by all means, please feel free to email me or Paul if you can't find what you're looking for.
Well, on this, yeah.
Over to you, Laura. I think we're done.
Okay, well, thank you. We are at the hour, and as we want to keep it to the to time constraints that we all have, but really this was a very inspiring and very thought-provoking session, because we really need as citizens to move on. And so as I always say, as a Be Women, we really need to get a pen, and after this call, what is it that you're going to do? What actions are you going to take? Are you going to sign the pledge right away? I already signed it before. I think it's a great idea to really move forward towards something. So get your pen, send an SMS, send a message to somebody in the next 5 minutes that you will say, okay, this is very interesting. Let's move this forward. Because I think that's the only way to really get things done. When you hear something interesting, act on it right away. Any closing remarks?
So, sorry, Laura, if I can just cut in there, just one other little thing is that I've talked about the voting power that Simpol has, the pressure that we can exert on politicians. What we've also found, though, is that many politicians sign on voluntarily to Simpol. Even if they're sitting on big majorities, they sign on. Why? Because they think, well, at last, here's an idea that makes sense. So there's a kind of common sense aspect to it as well, which one shouldn't underestimate. So I think we've often had, well, not often, but I think on 2 or 3 occasions, we've had one citizen has signed up. We've then forwarded that to the Member of Parliament, and the Member of Parliament has then signed the pledge. So just one person's action equals can equal one politician's action. That's powerful,
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, thank you very much. This is very powerful, and I think that everybody in the line and whoever is signed into for this call will get the recording of this incredible presentation, and very, very straightforward of what needs to be done to really create real change in our world. I mean, there's so much out there, but this is very simple. And you really hit the nail by saying that it's just countries are competing within each other. There's no real governance, and this can really lead to people might not be politicians might not be in agreement because of certain things, but if they are in agreement with the climate change or with what needs to be done, and put the ideals first before their egos, we might get a long way.